let's do it. Okay, so in case you don't know, I'm Tony. I'm the founder of the Shelf Help Club, the world's first self-help book club and platform. And we are all about celebrating personal development and working on ourselves. And for me, I think, well, I'm learning to understand that working on our financial health and well-being is very much part of our emotional well-being, our mental well-being, and a big part of self-development generally, actually. I'm getting a lot from our latest book at the moment, and I got a lot from our book that we'll be talking about tonight as well. So I will introduce our very special guest. So Peter is a financial expert and coach, presenter, podcaster, and author who is passionate about helping ordinary people create financial security through positive financial habits. So very much on our vibe. This is the book, the very gorgeous book that we'll be talking about. Peter, thank you so much for being here.
No, thanks for having me. Thank you very much indeed. And welcome everyone who's here already. Thanks for tuning in and attending.
I wonder if anyone's been honest about how much money they've spent in the what did you spend money on today, Peter? Do you know? Do you keep
I haven't actually spent any, or actually I lie. I've got to buy some new camera equipment and I've done the transaction, but I've got to return it because there was a mistake with the order. So I have kind of technically spent it. It was like
you almost
it was
spent some money.
2,378, but it's a business expense. But I haven't spent any personal money today so far.
Okay, not that it's good or bad, is it? Money is just a tool. So
It's a
it's like,
tool. That's exactly it. It's a tool to create whatever it is that you want, essentially. So yeah.
And I love, can I just say, I love this book cover. It's a bit blurry. Oh, there we go. I think, are you trying to make finance glamorous? Is this what's happening? Because I feel like I would not have picked this book up apart from this cover.
You know what it was, right? HarperCollins said to me, just let us do the book cover and all this kind of stuff for you. And I saw it at the first kind of like draft that they sent over, and I was like, I'm not sure, I don't know. And they said, listen, it will work because it's a gold piggy bank with some glasses. It's like you want to make it cool, and that's what I try to do. And yeah, but I get a lot of good feedback about the cover, but it wasn't I didn't love it initially when I started.
Interesting. Is that because it's like too bling and you're trying to keep things more basic and normal, like normalize it?
Yeah, kind of, but it just wasn't the book cover that I kind of imagined.
Okay.
I thought, I don't know, I was thinking of something a little bit more traditional maybe, but there was like, trust me, it will work, and
Yeah,
it's worked. So yeah.
it's working. Excuse me. I also really love the name of your channels, Conversations of Money, because what you say is that the content you create is very much about the conversations you wish you'd had about money growing up. So all of this stuff that none of us are taught, and we have to we learn or we don't learn, right, as we go along. So I really love the way that you're kind of bringing it back to basics. So just
Thank you.
just so the people here today can get an idea about you. So where are you and how are you today?
I'm good today. I'm at home in Shropshire. I live in Shropshire. I used to live in London for many, many years, but I met my partner 10 years ago this year. She keeps reminding me. I was working in Canary Wharf, and we did the whole back and forth. She lived in Manchester at the time. So we did the back and forth for a year. And then I got promoted in Canary Wharf to a different role. And part of the package was we can relocate you. So I tried to convince her to move to London. She was like, no, she likes the countryside. So this is kind of like the middle between, well, not really the middle. I've gone up a little further up than I would have liked. But yeah, I'm in Shropshire right now. And today's been a good day. I'm always busy, which is great. I shouldn't complain. Obviously, I run my own business. So the more busy I am, the better it generally feels, and it is. But sometimes, like most people, it's very easy to feel kind of like run down and burnt out because there's so much happening at any given time. But you just roll with the punches, really.
Yeah, and I think when you work for yourself and when you're riding a bit of a wave, like you do after a book comes out and that kind of thing, I suppose you want to say yes to everything, don't you?
It is, yeah. I mean, actually, the book is what a year and 3 days old today.
Happy birthday.
So yeah, it's been a bit of a crazy year to be honest. The way the book came about was a bit weird as well. It wasn't something that I wanted to do when I first started this in 2020, but didn't think I'd do it so quickly. I did it 2 years, well, 3 years in. I thought it would take a little bit more time to be able to do it, and to do it with HarperCollins as well was quite an honor as well. But yeah, the last 4 years have been pretty interesting around what I've been trying to do. Like you said, my entire goal is to kind of have conversations that I wish someone had with me when I was 19, 20 years old, and to keep it simple, have conversations as though I'm speaking to a friend, and just be really open and honest because, throughout the book, I talk about the fact that I've made so many mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes. It's what you do with it. Certainly when you start looking at digging behind and digging deeper into the behavioral psychology, your makeup when it comes to money, because 20% is about the practical tips, 80% is about the psychology and the behaviors, the mindset. And if you can't necessarily address those to a large degree, the practical stuff, there's friction. You can do it, but there's friction.
Mm. So it's kind of about setting yourself up for success, I suppose. The book we're currently featuring as our kind of book club read is Money, a Love Story. And Kate, the author, said the emotional side is probably once you get that right, then the practical side kind of follows. But until you, like you say, until you've got the mindset kind of right, quite often the other stuff is much harder.
Yeah, I think the psychological and the emotional side, they're a little bit intertwined. Because if you think about how your emotions manifest, they stem from something. And a lot of the time when you dig deeper, it stems from beliefs, mindsets, money scripts that we all kind of pick up and we tell ourselves. And I talk about common question that I ask people often is, what's your first memory of money? And
Mm.
people can't necessarily answer straight off the bat what that is. But if you can identify it, then the following question that I ask is, so what has that kind of instilled in you with how your relationship with money is today? And I talk about that in the book, where my first memory of money was when I was 5, 6 years old. I was fostered from 3 months to 8 years old. And my neighbor, Glenn, his dinners were always, his mum was a great cook. He was having steaks, lamb chops, all this kind of stuff. And we weren't having those kind of dinners in my household. So at 6 years old, I'm kind of tuning into the fact that Glenn can afford better dinners than we can. That then means that we don't have enough money or as much money as he does. And that instilled in me a scarcity mindset,
Mhm.
which can be a good thing. It can go two ways with that kind of mindset. For me, I ended up spending money on things that I never thought I would have and just buying things just because I could when I got to the level that where I could. For other people, it might turn into hoarding cash. So you save a lot of money, but you're not necessarily putting it in the right places or doing the right things with that money in order for it to grow and for you to create wealth and to invest and provide financial security. So they can manifest in different ways, but you have to kind of understand, where does it all stem from?
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk a lot about financial goals, don't you? Like setting goals. And so I suppose um, do our goals kind of come from those beliefs as well? Like you say, so for some of us that might be the scarcity, kind of like saving, hoarding. For some of us, it might be the goal might be to have the car, the house, that kind of thing.
I think goals are separate to your mindset. Although within the work that I do in coaching, and I've been done this for a while because I'm a qualified financial advisor, mortgage advisor as well. When you try to understand what your drivers are, so the psychological part of why you interact with money in the way that you do, what your relationship is founded on when it comes to money, oftentimes for a lot of people, and it's certainly true for me, and I can speak from experience, there are negative, poor habits that need changing.
Mhm.
And habits are difficult to change. And so there's something called intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. So an intrinsic motivation is something where you do something because there is an innate reward for you. It means something for you. Extrinsic is when you do stuff for other people, for validation, for recognition, for praise, that kind of stuff. Science tells us that extrinsic motivations are typically very short-lived, and it doesn't necessarily do anything to develop long-lasting change. Intrinsic is the opposite. So if you're doing it for you, for purposes, for reasons that mean something to you, then you're more likely to do what is necessary to make a new habit last longer. And
Yeah.
so goals are intrinsically important to that. Because when you get into the work of trying to break down what your old habits are, the habits that aren't serving you well, because of the day-to-day consequences, you might have to give up something that you have become accustomed to, or you might have to give up something that you'll find difficult. You cannot make that stick if you don't have a really clear goal. And so in the book, my book is very practical. in the way that it's set up. So you have exercises at the very, very beginning of the book, which set up the rest of the book. So the idea is, yes, we can talk about these principles, but we want to move you forward through each of the principles. And so the exercise at the beginning of the book is very, very important. I talk about doing the wheel of life exercise, the finance wheel exercise, and then culminating that and actually doing a timeline exercise, which is something we would do when I was advising with clients.
And so, yeah, so these are the exercises you do with a client that came to you to work one-on-one. And what,
Yeah.
as a financial coach then, because I honestly never thought that's something that I would ever think about having, not because I'm not interested, I didn't really know it was existed even until I started like going into this money stuff. What are the biggest, I suppose, challenges or problems or even goals that people present when they come to you for one-on-one?
The challenges over the past couple of years, they've changed a little bit actually. There is a lot of concern over two key things, and they form the first two principles in the book, really. The first one is financial control. So feeling as though you've got enough, your money's going far enough. And the second one being control over debt. Those are the two things that I've seen, even more so over the past couple of years with cost of living crisis and COVID. Those
Yeah.
are the two fundamental blocks. And I think when you think about this journey of trying to be financially secure or building some kind of financial security, people forget that there's a journey to get to it. You just don't go from where you are right now to financial freedom, whatever that might mean.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a post that I posted about on Instagram last week, questioning whether financial freedom is really a thing or not, whether it's a concept that we should continue to buy into, because the idea is it's an oxymoron. If your freedom or your perceived freedom is dependent on your finances, are you really free? Because you're tied your freedom to finances. So your finances will always be the focus. I always try and talk about creating your own reality where you become your own financial hero. So the idea of your own financial hero is that you have enough money to do with the things that you want to do. So you
Yeah.
want to go on holiday twice a year, you can go on holiday twice a year. You don't have to think too much about it. You might have to plan for it, but you don't have to think too much about it. It gives you the ability to live life within your terms. And budgeting and debt are two of the fundamental blocks that often I see missing. And it's why I focus so much on those two things specifically. But on your point on financial coaching, it's relatively new, certainly in the UK. In the US, they've had it for a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I noticed as a financial advisor is that most advisors won't see anyone if they don't have £50,000 in their pocket,
That's what I was
ready
just
to
thinking.
invest.
Yeah, if you want to get a financial coach, I'd imagine you'd have to have a lot of finances to manage and be coached on. So what you do is so great because you're kind of bringing that down a level to
Yeah.
normal people like us.
Yeah. I mean, the idea as a financial coach is, we don't give advice per se, and that's not the role. It's to give you the tools so that you can make better decisions on your own. So I do a lot of coaching with people across different walks of life, and investing is a really big thing because, yeah, it's important to make sure that you have money invested in these companies that run the world, right? People have had a lot to say about energy companies making a lot of money and their dividends payouts and their profits. Well, the way the world works is if you are invested in those companies, at least you partake in those dividend distributions. And that's a little difficult sometimes for people to understand. It's like I'm paying extra my gas and my electric. These guys are making 115 billion or whatever it might be in profits this quarter, which is
Mhm.
as a consequence of these prices going up. So as a consumer, you feel hard done by. But with the way the world works within this realm that I've been in over the past, 18 years in financial services, the clever, wealthy people, they own shares in those businesses. So yes, they might be paying more in their energy bill, but actually they have money invested in. So at least something comes back to them and it allows them to build wealth for the future. And it's
Yeah.
fundamental things like that that are important in terms of coaching. How do you get yourself to a position where you have the ability, where you've got the foundations in place, where you can make that kind of decision to invest in a company like an energy business, or Apple, for example, because we're all on iPhones, and I'm
Yeah.
here right now on a Apple Mac, desktop. How do you make those decisions? So it's building blocks to get there, and that's what the role of a coach is.
Yeah, totally. And you talked about, I mean, it's being smart with your money, isn't it? And in the book, actually, I was flicking through earlier, and there's a part when you say you didn't know anything about investing or shares, like until you were kind of all like late teens, early 20s. So how did you get so wise in this world? Kind of what's your story? What's your money story going from, like you said, being in foster care through to now advising people on how to invest their own money?
My journey's been a disaster. Let's put it that way. And I've learned the hard way. I was fostered from 3 months to 8 years old, and my parents are Nigerian, so they came over in the 70s. I was born in 79, and it was just normal back then. They would put an ad in the paper and just ask families to look after their kids and just go drop them down to go, no safeguarding, no nothing, look after my kid. And so from 3 months, I was in a foster I was in my foster parents' house, in a foster family's house being looked after. And I would see my parents once a year for 8 years during the summer for 2 weeks. And then one year they decided, well, my dad had already gone back to Nigeria. My mum was the only one left here. And they were like, well, you've not met your older brothers yet. So why don't you come to London for a 2 week holiday? And it should have been a 2 week holiday. But what they did is they put me on a plane to Nigeria. And I was 8 at that point, and I stayed there for 10 years. Should have been 2 years, stayed there for 10 years. And then fast forward 10 years when I was 18, I've never spoken to my foster parents for that period of time. They had this bright idea that, well, you're wasting away here. You were born in the UK, you've got a British passport, you've got more opportunity over there. Why don't you just get on a plane? We give you 50 quid, go find your foster parents who you have not, spoken to for 10 years. And so I got on a plane, I rocked up to my foster parents' house not knowing whether or not they still lived there. Luckily they did, but I had 50 quid in my pocket, and they kind of took me in for 2-3 months, helped me get my feet and national insurance number so I can get into a job. And shortly after that I moved out, but because I was so poor at budgeting money, I didn't understand how rent payments worked or anything like that. So I went into a house share, completely messed up all my budgeting and financial management, couldn't pay rent. They kicked me out and I was homeless, sleeping on the streets. And from there on, I spiral into debt because, well, guess what? I don't have money to feed myself. I've got any money coming in. It was an absolute disaster. So me getting a job in financial services was just, I, I had an angel over my shoulder, and I was on benefits at the time. And the job seeker attendant said to me, look, you need to be showing that you're not just dossing around and doing nothing. You need to go for a job interview. There's one at a building society in Eastbourne. You need to be there this day and make sure you're not late. And I was like, well, it's a bank, a building society, part of a bank. I owe lots of money in debt. They're going to take one look at me and be like, no, like, absolutely not. And I didn't really want the job because I was like, some of these banks I've been absconding from. So it's like, I owe overdrafts, I owe thousands of pounds. Like, I don't want to rock up to like someone who might be connected and be like, listen, hey, please give me a job. So I tried to sabotage the interview as much as I could. I went in jeans and a leather jacket. And the lady who interviewed me, Jenny Berry, she was like, oh my God, my customers really love you. And I'm like, yeah, we'll see what happens. You're going to do your credit scores and your credit checks, and you'll see that I'm not fit and proper, because to work in any institution, financial institution, you need fit and proper tests. I don't know what she did, but I started as a cashier, and the rest is really history. But I spent about 7 years in retail banking. I did 2 years in corporate banking, and the remaining of the years I've done in wealth management. So I qualified as a financial advisor back in 2016, worked for a pension fund, an investment house in Canary Wharf for a period of time, and I started what I'm doing now in 2020.
Wow, Peter, that is an incredible story. Like, not a disaster. I feel like it's a miracle. Like, it's miraculous, but it's an amazing story.
I'm lucky for it. I mean, like I said, I first picked up the whole investing thing in my 30s, 2012. When I was in Nigeria, I remember my dad, money was always tight in the household. It was the cause for all kinds of arguments and all kinds of stress for the family. And through it, my dad would always try and keep a kind of like a cool head. I never saw him really panic. But I remember him one day when I was probably about 16, 17, he started panicking that he didn't have a pension. And at the time, I didn't know what a pension was.
Mm.
I was heard this word, pension, pension, pension. And it was real concern for him. It's the first time I actually saw him like scared, like really, really worried. And we had a lot of financial pressures, but that specifically was a big worry to him. And it wasn't until 2012 when I started working for this investment house slash pension fund that I was like, this is what my dad was worried about. And
Mm.
that's why I'm so passionate about pensions now.
Yeah. And also, it's like everything you've been through and all the different stages of your life. When you talk about there's no judgment from you about anyone's financial position, that you really are coming from a place of you've been there, seen it, survived it, thriving from it. So I think that's incredible. That's actually such a gift as well.
I mean, I've struggled with debt for best part of 15 years, like rolling
Mhm.
credit cards over, being in huge overdraft debt. I mean, my overdraft was so big at one point, it didn't matter if I got paid or not. Like I was constantly in the minus, and that's soul destroying. Like that's really soul destroying. Then you put on top of that credit cards that you're just constantly trying to move on and move on, and you get to the point where you can't even put it onto a 0% balance transfer anymore. And then you can see that the minimum payments are creeping up. Then because you're overdrawn and because your finances aren't right, you can't even afford to make the minimum payment. So you start missing payments. And then I've been through the entire thing, so I know how people feel. And I'm
Yeah.
just fortunate now that I've been able to apply a lot of the stuff that I learned because it's been my job to learn. And my circumstances are completely different now because I've put into practice everything that I talk about in the book. Everything. It's what got me to where I am right now, where I don't have to do any work that I don't necessarily want to do.
Mm.
Don't have any debt. I've got a mortgage on this house, which will hopefully pay off in a couple of years' time. You know, from someone who was homeless to this position, it's a very, very big chasm. And that's because I put everything that I put into the book into practice personally. So I know that it works.
Exactly. You're walking the talk. You're like a living, breathing example of how this can work. And I think what you were just talking about then, for lots of people, when you get into a money mess, it's just like you just don't want to think about it, do you? Because it's like the shame of talking to somebody so openly as you just did then about a situation, a financial situation. I feel like shame and kind of embarrassment and not understanding just stops people from talking about it, which just makes it worse.
That's true. And I think it's really important for people to understand as well that actually we're naturally wired to do that. You know, it's a common theme in behavioral psychology. It's called the ostrich effect. You just bury your head in the sand, hoping that things will get better. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, that isn't the case. It gets worse and worse and worse. And the funny thing about debt is this, though, and this is one thing that I've realized is, you know, I went through a period where it was so stressful. Like if my phone rang and it was from a withheld number, didn't realize it, I'd be panicking. If
Mm.
I got a letter in the post where I was like, it was a brown letter and I didn't recognize, you know, I'd tear open the little window bit and try and see who it was so I could see the logo. I would panic. If
Just
I had a
like
knock on the
slowly.
door, yeah, if I got a knock on the door and it was someone I didn't recognize, I would panic.
Yeah.
And that means that you're more likely and more prone to just want to ignore it and get
Yeah.
at, you know, just put it in a corner, not even think about it. But actually, I got to the point where I was like, okay, I need to sort this out. And as scary as it was, and it was scary, I'm not saying that it isn't, but when you actually do have a look at it and it's debt specifically, and you're like, okay, let's see how bad this is or how big the problem is, there's something weird that happens where actually you feel this sense of like empowerment because actually I'm going to take charge of this now. I've looked at it and I know that I can do it. It might take a little bit of, you know, hard work, but I can do this. And for me, that was really eye-opening on my
Yeah.
journey. I was
Yeah.
like, this thing that I thought I was going to be scared of, I thought was insurmountable. Actually, it's not. You just have to
Mm.
take it in small steps. And back in the day, in my day, there was no, you know, step change or charities like that. You go to Citizens Advice Bureau, but who wants to go to Citizens Advice Bureau and be like, listen, I've got this much debt. I don't really know what to do. It's
Yeah.
embarrassing, man.
Yeah, totally. Well, I hope you're proud of yourself because I'm proud of you for like listening to that story. It's
No, thanks.
incredible.
Cheers.
And I feel like that's why this is why you're so successful now and how great you're in a position where now you do work you love and are sharing your advice and story. Just before we get into the practical stuff, I love to ask people, what is your relationship with yourself currently? Like, how would you describe your relationship with yourself and how has that changed? So how has that changed for you? um since, is it 4 years ago you said that you started doing like YouTube and all that kind of stuff?
Yep.
So
Yep.
yeah, how would you describe your relationship with yourself?
Um, that's a really good question. I am naturally very, very self-critical, and I'm naturally just a workaholic. My missus hates it. She's like, you need to switch off. And it's like, it's even worse when you're running your own business because
Yeah.
you don't get any holiday days. So it's like, you don't get holiday days, you don't get sick pay.
Well, you
Like,
do if the
so,
boss says you can, but you're the boss, so
but I'm yeah, exactly, but I'm the boss. So I feel like if I'm
yeah.
not working, I could be doing something better. And that's why when I go on holiday, it takes me at least a week and a half for me to wind down.
Mm,
So it's really, but relationship with myself, I feel a lot more confident about my own abilities now. Um, I I don't think I've been in a better place, headspace at least. For the past maybe I would say maybe 10 years now, I've not had any financial worries per se because I've got everything in order. So it gives you me more headroom to be able to think about different things and think about the things that I don't want to do and the things that I do want to do, put plans into place that I never thought were possible before. And I
yeah.
still have to work towards those things, but it's a much, much nicer place to be. And I think because of that, I feel better about myself in terms of my own sense of self-esteem. I know who I am now. I'm a little bit older, so I don't necessarily have this desire to want to impress or please people per se. And social media is just all about that, as it is. I'm very comfortable in my own skin.
Mm. So because you're creating content, a lot of content and putting stuff out, obviously there will be people that either don't like what you say or don't agree with what you say or whatever. So it sounds like you're quite good at just deflecting that at least, which is a positive.
Yeah, but the funny thing though, right? For me personally, across all of my socials, it is very, very rare that someone tries to pick an argument with me.
Oh,
And I
good.
don't know why. But I think because I've been doing it for so long and I'm consistent on social media and people kind of like know my credentials, like
Yeah,
I'm a qualified financial advisor, I'm a qualified mortgage advisor. I
yeah,
generally don't speak about things that I don't know anything about. And if we really need to get into the detail, I can give you a very, very detailed answer on pretty much anything. But I
yeah.
always keep it high level. And I think because people have seen me do Q&A sessions where I get into like the weeds and like, right, you really need to think about this, and this is the reason why. And if not, this is the reason why you need to, and these are the consider because people know that about me. I don't get that many people that try and kind of debate or argue what I say. And I think because I've done a lot of media as well, and you need to have, you're vetted to go into media.
Mm.
I think that kind of helps a little bit with credibility too.
Yeah, brilliant. And the thick skin, right? That means
100%. I mean,
yeah,
there are occasions where someone will try and say something and argue and stuff, and I'm all for it. I mean, I do like that kind of smoke, and I think it's actually quite interesting as well in terms of having a conversation so other people can actually see the reasons why things are being said, and
mhm.
that isn't to be 100% defensive, and that can be hard when you're doing it on text. That's one thing that I've learned in the professional world. Like, if you're gonna have these kind of conversations, have it in person, but on social media you can't.
Yeah, sure.
So it might seem a little harsh in the text form, but the point is we're trying to unearth. And I'm happy to say, actually, that's a really good point that you got there. And this is
Yeah.
some nuance around it if you were to consider that. But I create short form video. Normally 10, 15 minutes is all I have. If I'm doing a reel, it's 90 seconds.
Mm.
There's only so much you can fit within that.
Yeah.
So I can't cover everything and every eventuality, but the whole point of content is so that people can use it as a basis to do their own research and make their own decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And then how lovely that you then get to create something like the book, which is bringing all of that together. So
Yeah.
let's get a little bit practical then.
Hmm.
After hearing about your amazing story, let's talk about your 5-step approach because I think that's brilliant, and then that's a good way for people to kind of to break it down, for people to take away some things from tonight. So can you talk us through that? I know obviously there's a whole book about it, but I'd love to get an overview of the approach.
Yeah. Okay, so the formula in the book is called the Money Basics, and BASIC is the acronym. So it looks at 5 components of your finances that you need to try and get in order for you to be your own financial hero, which is a sense of financial independence. So starting at the top, and it is sequential for a reason. So it just so worked that the acronym worked out to be BASIC.
Did
It
it?
was intentional. Yeah, it
As an
just so
ex-journalist,
happens
I'm like, I would make it work.
it also had a ring to it as well. So
Perfect. Yeah.
the very, very top of it, we've got B, which is budget financial management. So the whole idea of the budget is you cannot do anything else unless you have really good financial control. That's just the reality of the matter. So if you're not able to efficiently manage the money you have coming in versus the money you have going out, you're always going to be fighting a losing battle. And people will just assume that if you earn more money, then it's easier. I can tell you right now, as a former financial advisor, that is not the case. I've had clients who earn a lot of money who are still in debt. So the idea is if you can manage a very small amount of money, you're going to be even better at managing those resources when you start to earn more money. And what I do in the book is I outline my own system. So I talk about a three-pot approach. Now, and this is based on the expenses that we all have to pay. So the first pot is you have to have your essentials, which will be your rent, your mortgage, your gas, your electric, your council tax, all the things you must pay for. Then you have a second pot, which is your non-essential. So that could be gym membership, subscriptions, the like. In my experience over 18 years, typically that's where most people will basically stop, those two pots. Essentials, then anything else is just, we'll just go spend it. The most successful people that I've worked with financially have a third pot, which is what I call the other pot. And that pot is where you make sure that you can allocate a percentage of your income to go into that. And the whole idea of having that pot is it allows you to build for future things. And it might be paying off debt, buying your first home, helping kids with a house deposit. It could be anything, right? But you need to have that third pot. So in the budgeting section of the book, in the formula, I basically encourage people to have a look at, right, how does your income get spread across those three pots in a percentage value? Now, there are really, really good budgeting formulas. Some people say the 50-30-20 approach works, which I think is great. But I think in 2024, if you live in a place like London, for example, your rent could be 60% of your earnings. And if you're trying to work towards that 50-30-20, it could be quite depressing. So what I say is this: your essentials are your essentials. Take care of those. Your non-essentials are still an important element, because within your non-essentials, you might have subscriptions in there, but also you want to put in your non-essentials will be things like if you want to go on a holiday, account for it, budget for it. So you know you're putting money aside for this every single month. And that proactivity will it will lift you of any financial pressures that you might have around that specific thing. But the one rule in that budgeting formula is you have to have a percentage of your income going into the other pot. And I don't care if it's 1%, 2%, 10%, 20%, you have to have something. And the reason for that is in behavioral psychology, it's all about habit building. If you can start out with 1%, and let's just say, you have a son that's 19-year-old or a daughter that's 19-year-old just getting their first job, and it's 1% that you encourage them to get into that other pot at 19, it might only be £100. But as they get older, get 25, and they're earning more money, that 1% becomes bigger. As they get into their 30s, it becomes bigger. And it's the habit, that routine of there's 1% of my wages going into this thing. It was this much, but actually it equates to a larger amount later on that you can build from. So that's the budgeting area.
Peter, is that other pot, is that the same as savings then? Would you use that for savings or investments?
Yes. So the purpose of the other pot is to help you fulfill any goals that you might have. So it might be, do I need an emergency fund? For most people, yes, you do. You need an emergency fund. For most people, you might want to invest. Yes, that's where it will come from. If you want a house deposit,
So
that's
it
where it
could
will
be
come from.
anything, but it's just so that you know that every month you are kind of taking the action, an empowered action to be saving or putting towards something that's not what you're just spending.
That's right. And the whole purpose of that other pot is you can accumulate as much money as you want, but when you get to a stage, what you then do is you allocate it to a specific purpose. So it might be an emergency fund or a savings. It might be a house deposit. It might be retirement planning. It might be an investment. But the process of having that bit of money going into that pot gives you options.
Yes.
And that's the most important thing.
Yes.
Psychologically, you feel differently now because you can see that there's this pot of money that is just building up, and you can allocate it to something. It's a huge win psychologically.
Yeah.
Then
It's like you mentioned self-esteem earlier, isn't it? It's that kind of like,
100%.
yeah, I'm doing this and good on me.
100%. And it's weird because, when you think about the psychology of it, that's where you get dopamine boost. You think about a dopamine boost, that's how you feel, the happiness that you feel, the joy that you feel, the fulfillment that you feel. You actually get that when you start to see that pot is growing and you can allocate it to specific things that you're working towards. So that's the financial management model there.
Okay,
The A
that's B
talks
for
about
budget.
avoiding debt. Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
The A talks about avoiding debt. Now, obviously, understand good debt, bad debt. Bad debt is, car finance, overdrafts, credit cards, loans, all those types of things. Mortgages can be good debt. And actually, you know what? Some of those things could also be good debt as well. So, for example, if you take out a personal loan or a business loan, that could be good debt. But understanding the difference between the two is really, really important. And in the book, I try to go through examples of what you do if you're struggling with credit cards, overdrafts. What are the approaches? What are some of the options you can have a look at? I actually have just finished a couple of weeks ago a book club where we take people through this through the principles in the book. It's 6 weeks long. We had a cohort of 20 people, and one of the attendees in the first cohort, she had debt that was costing her about £1,023 a month, and I
in
walked her
interest.
through. That's her minimum payments,
Oh my God.
just her minimum payments, and we outlined it all, and we said, okay, look,
Excuse me.
so how are you feeling? Obviously, not that great. She's self-employed, right? So where do you want to be? And I get them all to do the timeline, wheel of life, finance wheel, all that kind of stuff. So everything connects together. And in the end, we walked her through, or at least I walked her through, what are the options that you have. For her, it was all about consolidation. So she did a consolidation process and actually saved her £400 a month in repayments, and the debt is going to be paid off within a known period of
Yeah.
time. So in
Mm.
the book, I try and give examples of what that might look like in the debt part. For me, there's a few of I give a few anecdotes and stories in the debt part, and the reality is that debt, it robs you of future possibilities and future opportunities. And I think that's really important, a notion to understand when you're looking at debt specifically. The S is all about saving early. So much like in the budgeting, we talk about that other pot, it's really taking it to the next level. So how do you actually build that habit, build upon that habit to create an emergency fund, to put a nest egg behind you? And once you've got those immediate term priorities laid out, how do you then take it to the I, which is investing? So investing as early as you possibly can. The reality is with investing is that the longer you have, the more potential you have for your money to grow. And if
Mhm.
you're starting late, there's nothing wrong with that. But it's unlikely that you're going to get the same rewards than if you started it when you're in your 20s, if you started in your 30s. In fact, if you look at some of the compound interest calculators, the difference is huge for
Mhm.
small amounts of money. So investing early and getting into that habit of understanding how does the world work. If you've got an iPhone, if you've got, any piece of technology in your house, most of those companies you can buy shares in. All of the energy companies you can buy shares in. So being a part owner, a shareholder with those kind of companies means that as those companies grow, as those companies make more profits and have dividend payouts to share with their shareholders, you're actually partaking in that as well. It's making sure that your money is working as hard as possible for you. And
Mhm.
then the C, which is the final part of the formula, talks about credit scores. And the reason why that is important is because ultimately, if you want to purchase or do anything that is meaningful, like buy a house or you want to buy a car, that is heavily dependent on your credit score. And if your credit score is shot to bits, the banks penalize you. If they don't tell you no, they rack up the interest rate that you're going to pay, which means that you're then giving them more money than you should. But with a strong credit score, it gives you the ability to leverage debt in the right way, and it allows you to do so at rates that aren't going to be too expensive, I would say.
Yeah, sure. Guys, if anyone's got any specific questions, put them in the chat maybe. I mean, you don't need to share all your finances, but if you've got anything specific, it's a good opportunity to ask the expert. I've got a few more questions anyway, but if you do have any, put them in the chat. But Peter, just going back to when you're talking about investing and the kind of compound, the power of the compound, it's really, that's why it's important, isn't it, for people with kids to understand this? Because if you're then start able to start investing on behalf of your kids, then we can give them that gift of the compound interest.
Yeah, look, I think the world has changed so much. One of the common things that I find at the moment is people wanting to get on the poverty ladder, and it's becoming almost impossible,
Mhm.
even on just decent wages now, because of the short supply of properties. And when I speak to parents, they're staggered at what small things can amount to in the future, and that's kind of a theme through the book, the compound effect. You
Yeah.
can do small things now that end up making a huge difference in the future. And so for kids, things like junior ISAs are an absolute no-brainer. Like absolute no-brainer. The caveat with the junior ISA is that your child takes ownership of that money at age 18, which some people will be scared about, but I actually think it's a positive thing because it means that you must start to have conversations
Yeah.
of money, about money, with your kids as they grow up. And the
Mm.
beautiful thing about a junior ISA is you can have it invested in all of these companies that are running the world. So the Apples, the Amazons of this world, the Googles, the Teslas, the British Gas, BT, you name it. You can invest in these companies. And when you compound that amount, if you had a newborn today, fast forward to 18 years old, depending on how much you're putting in, this could literally be hundreds of thousands of pounds.
Yeah.
And as parents, it's not just you that can contribute, anyone can contribute. Aunts, uncles,
Mm.
grandparents can contribute. And in opposed to just buying them things like physical things for for
Yeah.
for birthdays and Christmas, put money into this thing for them
Yeah.
and tell them, look, we're investing for your future. Because just think about the ability that it possibly gives. The fact that they could turn 18 and you can say, listen, we've been investing this money for you all this time. There's a deposit so you can go and buy a house.
Yeah.
Or you might even be able to buy a house with such a big deposit that, number one, you don't even need a mortgage, or the mortgage that you might need will be small.
Yeah.
Most of us didn't get that start. So it's
Absolutely
a
not. Yeah.
huge thing to be thinking about and speaking about sooner rather than later.
Yeah. And go back to your whole reason for being the channels and everything, the conversations around money. Like when you said about what's your earliest memory of money, I think for most of us it won't be sitting down and having a kind of calm conversation about it with our parents, will it? It'll be the stress or the secrecy or the it wasn't there. But I don't think for lots of us we weren't necessarily involved in finance chats as children. So yeah, I think that's such brilliant advice. Are you ready for me to put you on the spot and ask a few questions
Hey,
from the
listen, go for it. And you can
Let's
ask
go for it.
anything.
Let's do
There are
it.
no questions that I don't answer, by the
We'll
way.
put him to the
So
test.
yeah,
Okay, first one from Steph. When investing into a managed fund, what is too much for a management fee? What does a good management fee look like?
that really depends. It depends what they're doing. Typically, you're looking at 1% plus. I would say if you're looking at anything, if you're paying anything over 1.5, 1.5 is toppy. Anything over that is definitely toppy. The thing that you need to understand is, and there's a lot of content on social media about passive funds and passive investing, which is great, but you have to understand the difference between passive and managed. With a managed manager or a managed fund, at least someone is trying to prevent your investment falling and just passively tracking the markets. If a crash were to happen, you're going to have that intervention and people are analyzing stuff. With a passive investment, literally all it does is track. And if you go back to 2007, 2008, everyone in a passive fund who did nothing would have seen their investment drop by 40, 50%, because all it does, if the index goes down, it goes down with it. No one's
Mhm.
intervening unless you can do it yourself. And the question then becomes, well, at what point do you intervene? If you do intervene, where do you actually move it to? So there's lots of expertise questions within that. Whereas with the managed fund, you're likely going to have someone step in and try and stop it. But 1%, 1.5 is toppy. If you're paying more than that, oof, that's very expensive. But 1% is probably where I've seen them through my career.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Hope that's helpful, Steph. A question from Andrea. Is it better to put money into an ISA before investing?
Well, technically speaking, an ISA is an investment if you've got it into a stocks and shares ISA. So look, before you begin investing, and I talk about this in the book, and it's sequential, remember. So budgeting, avoid debt, save early. Investing is the fourth thing on the ladder. And the reason why investing is the fourth thing on the ladder is because in save early, the first thing I encourage people to do is to get an emergency fund around you. So, for example, if your expenses per month are £1,000, the question you need to ask yourself is, well, how much would you want in an emergency fund so that if you were to lose your job when able to work, you can cover your basic bills? So for some people, it will be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. I've had people who have said it will be 12, 18 months. You get to decide. But the idea is that within your ISAs, yes, it's tax free, but you shouldn't really invest until you have a decent emergency fund in place. You can put it into cash ISAs. So you can definitely have your savings or your emergency fund in your cash ISA. There's no risk there. Get a pretty decent rate nowadays on the high street. But you need to understand the separation between a cash ISA, stocks and shares ISA. Ideally, before you go to a stocks and shares ISA, make sure you've got a decent amount in a cash ISA as an emergency fund.
Brilliant. And this next question kind of links into that. What's better, in your opinion, for the average person, adding more to your pension or investing in shares? So that kind of goes back to your, in what order do we do things? So pension or shares first?
It really depends, because there are different. So look, when you say shares and pensions, in my head, I view them as the same thing. They're just different wrappers, right? So the best way of explaining this is, if you pick up a box of Quality Streets, right, there are different colored wrappers to the chocolates, but they're all chocolates at the end of the day, right? So your pension might be your blue wrapper, and your stocks and shares, as you refer them to, might be your red wrapper, but they're still all just an investment. So we call them wrappers. So let's just say the pension is the blue wrapper. You get certain benefits for putting money into a pension, but there is a huge caveat. If you can't access the money until you're 55 under the current legislation. So if you're in your 30s and you think, okay, look, I might need this money in 5 years' time, there's no point in putting it into a pension because you won't be able to touch it until you're 55. So
Yeah.
in that instance, it might be best to have a look at something like a stocks and shares ISA, because at least it's tax-free, and at least any gains that you get from that during the time it's in there is completely tax-free as well, and you can draw it out tax-free. So I think it's important to understand the pros and cons of each. But if you are employed, by the way, that's a pension. Your workplace pension is a pension. It's invested in the stock market. So I would definitely encourage you to, make sure that you're taking advantage of that, because it's free money. The government has to, your employer has to put in 3% of your earnings every
Mm,
single year. So,
yeah.
and if you have a matching scheme, even better.
Brilliant. Stacey, what investment platform is the best value for a newbie starting to invest with small sums of money each month? I always get intimidated by charges and whether those charges would be more than what I'm actually putting in.
Okay, yeah, really good question. There's quite a few. I'll give you a couple of options in a moment. One thing I will say about charges is this. It is important that you keep charges down for sure. But you have to remember what it is that you're paying them to do. So they're going to take all of the weight away from you in terms of trying to pick something for you to invest in. So it's called a robo service, because they automate that entire thing. You answer a few questions, they build something, boom, you go into it, you send them money. Now, because you start off in that manner, doesn't mean you have to continue with them. You may start to read more, learn more, and decide, actually, I'm going to move things away, which you can do. But I think the best ones that I come across during my time, I'm thinking of ones that I reviewed on my channel who just kept it really, really simple.
Yeah.
So you can go on the website and you won't be confused by any of the language. Probably the top of the tree for that is Wealthify. They
Wealthify.
are they are so good at just keeping the language so simple. It's not going to be confusing. You'll know exactly what you're getting into. But yeah, they are a robo service. Aside from that, you've got the likes of, I was going to say Moneybox, but Moneybox is a little bit toppy. You've got Money Farm. You can actually pick up the phone and speak to someone at Money Farm if you had concerns or you're
Novelty.
worried, which is a novelty now.
Yeah.
Wealthify also do that. You can pick up the phone to the guys at Wealthify, and they'll also be able to answer any questions that you have. So I'd say those two: Wealthify, Money Farm.
And I think what I'm getting from you is as well, don't worry that if you're starting small, just start. It's
Oh,
the
listen,
advice. Yeah.
just start.
Just start.
Again, going back to the other pot, right? I mean, if you think about that being the bucket where it all comes from, I don't care if it's 1%, 2%. Look, you can start with £1. Even
Yeah.
if it is £1 a month, just put it in.
Yeah.
It may not be completely fruitful at £1 a month, but the point is you're developing the habit of
Yeah.
just having
Totally.
money go in.
Yeah.
I finally got my missus to start investing, after years of just trying to explain it to her. And she looks at her investment account. She's like, oh, this is nice. There's money building up, and actually it's doing well at the moment. So yeah, you're trying to form the habit.
Yeah. Our partners are sometimes our toughest our toughest case studies, aren't they?
Indeed. Indeed.
Jackie, given that we're all living longer, is it still worth investing once you've retired if you can afford it?
If you can afford it, yes. It really depends on your financial circumstances. And I think that's where you probably need a little bit of planning because ideally, I mean, there is an argument to say why should you need to invest past your retirement, past the point where you actually start, your retirement journey and just start taking an income, because the idea is that hopefully in a utopia, you've built up enough funds to be able to just generate you an income that you're living on, so you don't really need to invest any longer. That isn't necessarily the reality for a lot of people, though, unfortunately. So yes, you can continue to invest, but I think how you invest in the accounts that you use become even more important because a pension at that point probably isn't the most efficient account for you to use potentially.
Okay, I'm going to ask, there's a few more questions about pensions actually, so I'll ask these now. If you're younger, would you go into a higher risk pension as you've got longer to go until you draw it?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about in the book we talk about timeline, but there is also, and I talk about this in the investing section as well, there's a timeline when you invest. And the general rule of thumb is that if you have a long time to invest, you can afford to take higher risk because your money will work harder for you over that period of time. And if there are any drops in the market, because typically when you're investing, you've got to weigh up risk versus reward. And the risk factor is that you could put money in and it could fall in value. But when you look back over the markets historically, there's probably a
Mm,
crash. It used to be every 10 years or so. We're well overdue one at the moment. And many people say actually we've had a bit of volatility in the market. But the idea is if you're investing for 20 years and you have one market crash, you have enough time for
mm.
it to recover. So yeah, it is generally a good idea to take more risk the younger you are, because the money's going to be there for much, much longer and will work longer for you and harder for you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. One more pension question. How do you find, or what is the most efficient pension management company?
Oh, that's a really, really that's a difficult question to answer. There are so many out there. There are so many out there that it's hard for me to be able to kind of like give you a pinpoint answer. Each of them do different things. So, for example, I have a pension with one of my workplace pensions with Legal in General, but one that is often quoted these days is Royal London, and the reason for that is Royal London can be quite um, efficient in terms of its cost, but then they may not have as many options for you to invest in. So it really depends on what it is that you're looking for, what phase of your journey you're on. You may be at a phase where actually you probably want enough choice to be able to invest in something, or you might be in a position where you're just describing earlier, where you're young enough where you maybe want to take advantage of things like AI. One provider might have an option for that, another might not. And so, and it also depends on whether they're how they're actually managing your investment as well. What kind, so you can go into passive pension funds, you can go into active pension funds, and the fees are all depending on those as well, depending on who you're using. So it's a little hard to decipher.
Okay, and this might be a really dumb question, but can you choose to move your pension to a different company if it's so in my experience, in my case, it's I have pensions with old jobs and obviously
Hmm.
they kind of invested them in whoever they invested in. Am I able to, is that my money to take out and put it where I want to?
Yeah. And a lot of people forget to do this, and it's something that is worthwhile doing. I mean, we know that people, generally speaking, when they leave their old job, if they're not opted into like email updates and it's based on an old system of we'll send you a letter in the post, you
Yeah,
probably moved addresses. So
yeah,
people lose their pensions and completely forget that they have a pension lying around. So
yeah.
now that you have consolidation services where you can literally you type in where you worked, your national insurance number, what period of time you actually worked over that period of time in that company, and they basically just go out and go find the pension pots for you and consolidate into one place. If you have the ability to do that, it's definitely worthwhile because you'll get the benefit of everything being in one place, number one, and you'll be able to oversee just one investment. And you can track that one investment as well, in opposed to worrying about three or four that are all
Yeah,
over
yeah.
the place.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. Excuse me. I think we'll finish on, this is a great question. Finish on a question about AI. You just mentioned it briefly. Emma has asked the question, what could the potential positive and negative impact of AI in the financial world or investment world be? What's your take on that?
Well, we've been speaking about it for a number of years now, even before AI became a craze, that there is a potential that in the end you'll have a lot of automated investment solutions, which I don't think will necessarily be a bad thing. If anything, I think it will be good because it will pull down prices. in terms of the management fees that you're speaking of, that we've been speaking of here. So I think that would be a positive thing. I think there has been a fear amongst financial advisors that it would replace them. I don't think that's necessarily true, because one thing that I've kind of learned through my career is, certainly when you get to a certain level, you want to know that the person is looking after it. And there is
Mm,
only so far AI can go in terms of reassuring you of your decisions, because it
yeah.
isn't plain sailing when you're investing. Some years it will be up, some years it will be down, and people react to that differently. And the one thing that brings a lot of people comfort is being able to speak to a person. And
Yeah.
that's the whole point of a professional like a financial advisor, is to help you understand the goal. So like what I do in the book, Wheel of Life, Finance Wheel, Timeline, really document your goals, work out what steps you need to take towards them, and then help you review how you're doing against those goals based on what's going on in the world around you at any given time, and making small interventions and tweaks if needed. And I
Mhm.
don't think that AI is ever going to be able to deliver that level of comfort of speaking to a person necessarily.
Yeah, because it is quite emotional, isn't it? Even though it's numbers and yeah, like charts and all that kind of stuff. It's like ultimately we are very emotional when it comes to money. So, and that's what kind of can make decisions for us, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, one of the things that we always say is, try and take the emotion out of investing, but that's harder said than done. It really,
Mm,
really is. I mean, we all work extremely hard, and the biggest battle that a lot of people have to overcome, and sometimes you just can't, you have to know how to manage it, is your loss aversion. Everyone has loss aversion. Nobody likes looking at their investment portfolio and seeing it down. Like nobody does, and that
no.
will happen constantly during your investment journey. It's never just going to be rosy increase, unlike what social media will tell you. You're going to have down periods, and that loss aversion that you have to battle with. The reason why the intrinsic goals are so important is because you have to go back to why you're doing this in the first place.
Yeah.
What's the actual goal here? So when you take that into context with, okay, so that was the goal, this is why we were on this path. Has anything changed with the goal? No. Okay. So let's have a look at the overall journey that you've been on with this investment. Because, a down number might only be for the year. And I've certainly sat in review meetings with clients where it's like, we're down 3% this year, but actually you've been in for 5 years.
Yeah.
Overall, you're up 18%, but you're down 3% this year. So actually the positive is you're 15% up
Mm.
over the 5 years. But people don't necessarily see that because the loss aversion is on the immediate number that you see in front of you.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Well, it's 8 o'clock. Time flies when you're talking about money, right? Who thought I would
Indeed.
ever say that? Peter, thank you. This has been so
Thank
helpful
you.
and
Thank you.
useful. Everyone is saying just thanks so much for a session. Thank you. All the information we thought we'd wish we'd heard when we were younger.
Mm.
Very interesting. Yeah, thank you so much. Honestly, it's been
Thank you.
an absolute pleasure to talk to you. This is the book, guys, The Money Basics, the blinging, lovely book. We've shared links. Steph shared links in the chat. So I think anybody who wants to get practical, which is all of us now, right, needs to
Hmm.
get the book and start setting